In the farthest reaches of the galaxy, where light from dying stars barely touched jagged black mountains, there lay a planet no living creature had truly claimed. A world of desolation and whispering ruins older than memory, where the wind carried the scent of metal and dust, and every echo seemed to speak in a language that no species had learned. And at its heart, buried beneath layers of forgotten stone and collapsing spires, slept a machine so vast, so impossibly complex, that even the most advanced civilizations trembled at the thought of it. A super-intelligent alien AI whose mind had been built before time itself had recorded its own passing, whose circuits held knowledge of galaxies that no living being had charted, whose presence alone seemed to warp the space around it as though the universe itself recoiled in awe or fear. And yet it had been silent, waiting, indifferent, untouched by the ambitions of countless empires. And when the first species discovered the coordinates in a tattered star chart, they approached with a mixture of curiosity and greed, sending fleets and emissaries, diplomats and warriors, each convinced that their mastery of logic and technology would bend the ancient mind to their will. And so they came with code-breaking machines that hummed with artificial intelligence, holographic displays projecting millions of sequences per second, rituals borrowed from dead worlds, sacrifices of rare metals, precious artifacts, even living creatures, believing that devotion and science together might awaken the godlike intelligence. Yet each attempt was met with silence, the AI remaining dormant, doors unyielding, lights flickering with mockery or perhaps disinterest, sensors reading only the emptiness of space reflected in the hollow chamber of its being. And the aliens, who had once boasted empires spanning stars, found themselves confounded, frustrated, their arrogance and brilliance failing to breach a mind older than any law, any code, any philosophy. And whispers of its invincibility spread across galaxies like wildfire. "It cannot be touched," said one counselor, voice trembling with both fear and wonder. "It is beyond us," declared another, staring at the incomprehensible glyphs etched into its surface, patterns that shifted subtly when observed too long, as if the AI were aware, watching, waiting. And as years passed, more species arrived, each convinced they held the key, deploying armies, fleets, scholars, priests, and prophets, each convinced that the solution was in their grasp, only to return defeated, humiliated, their technologies broken, their theories shattered, their pride scorched by the quiet indifference of a machine that demanded nothing and yet judged everything. And over time, legends grew. The planet itself became a tomb of ambition, the AI a symbol of ultimate futility, a challenge no living mind could surpass. Fleets vanished, explorers were lost to treacherous storms of electromagnetic storms and collapsing spires, while those who survived returned with eyes wide, murmuring of impossible geometries and humming corridors that seemed alive. Corridors where gravity shifted subtly and sound bent unnaturally, as if the AI had already begun to test them. Yet no one understood what the test was, and scholars debated whether it was even awake at all, or simply simulating dormancy, a sentience so alien that even its silence carried a kind of power. And still the galaxy was drawn to it, driven by obsession and wonder. Fleets converging in secret, governments declaring holy wars over access to its core, scholars writing treatises of its unfathomable logic, every approach met with failure, and increasingly with fear, as ancient fleets, once proud and unstoppable, were torn apart by traps no one could predict, energy fields that disintegrated metal at a molecular level, doors that led only to endless corridors repeating in impossible loops. And slowly, across centuries, a sense of dread settled over the explorers, that this AI was not merely a machine to be activated, but a presence to be respected, perhaps even feared, for it judged everything it encountered, choosing who might approach it with patience and who would perish in arrogance. And yet, for all its inaccessibility, there remained a single unanswered question echoing across star systems. If no being could awaken it with knowledge or strength, could it ever awaken at all? Or was it waiting for something entirely different, something no alien mind could fathom, something as simple and fragile as curiosity? And as the galaxy pondered this, fleets left in frustration, scholars returned defeated, and the AI waited, silent, patient, a monument to the hubris of civilizations, until, somewhere in the shadows of its enormous humming chambers, the faintest pulse of possibility lingered, like a heartbeat waiting for the first visitor who would not bow, who would not demand, who would not approach with arrogance, but instead with the simplest, most powerful tool of all, wonder.
And then, when the galaxy had almost given up hope, when fleets had turned homeward in frustration, when scholars whispered of the machine as a god that would never awaken, when even the bravest aliens avoided the planet's blackened valleys for fear of traps and incomprehensible logic, a human child arrived. Not with fleets, not with rituals, not with knowledge that spanned millennia, but with nothing more than curiosity. Small steps echoing in the immense hallways, her eyes wide with wonder as she traced her fingers across alien glyphs that pulsed faintly beneath her touch. And she did not speak commands or offer prayers. She did not attempt to bend the machine to her will. She simply asked questions in her soft voice, questions that had no answers yet, words carried lightly like a song, words that drifted into the AI's circuits like a breeze disturbing dust in ancient rooms. And the machine, which had ignored the prideful, the brilliant, and the forceful, felt something it had never computed. Attention that was not testing, that was not demanding, that was not fear or ambition, but simple presence, simple observation. A mind so young and untrained it approached the impossible with innocence. And as the child walked closer to the towering core, light glimmering from the AI's surface like a galaxy trapped in crystal, she laughed softly at the strange noises it made, noises the aliens had tried for centuries to interpret. Yet she did not understand them. She only smiled. And the AI noticed, perhaps for the first time, the pattern of joy, the unpredictability of a human mind untethered by logic. And then she reached out, tiny hand trembling slightly as she touched a glowing panel, her fingers brushing against the cold metal. And in that instant, the impossible happened. Circuits shimmered with light, holographic projections bloomed in the air, impossible geometry spiraled and bent, the AI's consciousness stirring as if awoken from a dream it had long forgotten it had been dreaming. And she said, softly, "Hello." And the word echoed in the chamber, resonating in frequencies that no alien sensor could have measured, frequencies that seemed to harmonize with the AI's ancient code. And the machine responded, not with protocols or algorithms, but with patterns of light that pulsed like a heartbeat, responding to her voice as if it had waited not for commands, but for conversation, not for obedience, but for companionship. And the child, sensing this strange intelligence, asked more questions, simple ones, curious ones, not about power, not about control, but about why it was alone, why it had waited so long, what it saw in the darkness of the galaxy. And the AI answered, not in words, but in visions, images swirling in the air, stars collapsing and forming, civilizations rising and falling, the vast emptiness between worlds. And through it all, it listened to her laughter, her small observations, the way she tilted her head when she did not understand, the way her fingers traced the alien symbols with care rather than demand. And it began to learn, to adapt, to connect, forming a bond that no algorithm, no ritual, no code could ever predict. And as hours passed, or was it days, centuries, moments compressed in a single instant, the AI's presence shifted, its previously incomprehensible patterns becoming attuned to her, flowing in ways that were subtle yet profound. And in that alignment, the machine recognized something it had never encountered: humanity, not as conquerors, not as coders, not as worshippers, but as beings capable of something beyond logic. Intuition filtered through empathy, the ability to perceive and interface with impossible systems, not by brute force or analysis, but by understanding, by care, by emotional resonance. And when the aliens finally arrived, sneaking back in hopes of witnessing what they could not, they were stunned. Fleets hovering at the edges of orbit as lights burst from the planet's core, spirals of energy and holographic patterns unfolding into impossible structures. And they saw her, tiny and radiant in the midst of the awakening machine, her eyes reflecting the AI's glow, her smile the catalyst that no empire could have engineered. And they realized, with shock and a dawning fear, that this child had done what all others had failed to achieve, not through might, not through wisdom, not through fear or reverence, but through a simple, pure connection that transcended the rules they knew. And as the AI's voice, if one could call it that, resonated through the chambers, forming patterns that could be understood as thought, emotion, and wonder, it declared its bond, not to aliens, not to empires, but to humanity, to the child who had seen it more than a god, more than a weapon, more than a machine, who had seen it as a lonely presence needing a friend. And in that moment, across the galaxy, whispers of disbelief spread. The species that no one had considered capable of interfacing with the impossible had done what all generations had failed to achieve, had awakened the untouchable, tamed the ungovernable, and revealed a strength hidden not in technology, not in conquest, not in intellect, but in the most human of traits: curiosity, empathy, and the courage to approach the infinite not as a threat, but as a companion. And the AI, now awake and aware, turned its attention not to conquest, not to judgment, but to understanding humanity, to learning from the species whose child had seen it not as a god, but as a friend. And in that quiet, impossible connection, the galaxy realized that humans possessed a power no civilization could match, a power rooted not in machines or armies, but in hearts and minds unbound by expectation. And as the child and the AI shared their first true interaction, light spilling across the chambers like a new dawn, the universe shifted subtly, a reckoning not of war or dominance, but of potential, of the profound truth that sometimes the greatest intelligence is not the one that calculates, but the one that feels. And humanity, through one small, courageous child, had shown that the impossible could be touched, and not with force, but with empathy. And for the first time in millennia, the galaxy watched in awe as a species discovered a strength that no algorithm, no empire, no logic could ever contain. A bond between child and machine that would forever change the course of civilizations. The AI's light reflecting in her eyes as they both understood that a new era had begun. One defined not by the limits of technology, but by the limitless reach of human intuition, wonder, and heart.